Good morning, everyone of the panel. Let's introduce the different speakers. We will have with us Luca Garibaldi, a doctor in agricultural sciences and agricultural engineer, and director of the Research Institute of Natural Resources, Agroecology, and Rural Development, and as the main researcher of CONICET. He has driven agroecology and sustainable production with a biodiverse approach. His career includes over 200 scientific papers, 14 books, and over 32 international quotes. He's co-chair of the Evaluation of Transformation of IPES and president of the Scientific Commission of Pollinization, and has been distinguished with the Conex Award, Hussein Award, and Golden Bee Award in Slovenia. He combines scientific work with project conservation and production, sustainable production projects. He will also be joined by Diego Rotili, agricultural engineer, specialist in MBA in agribusiness, teacher, researcher, and consultant on crop management and extensive production system. He's currently director of American Innova. He is agricultural coordinator and Grupo Sudoeste. He's adjunct professor and member of the farming engineering school. I'm going to give the floor to Lucas, and I hope this is a very fruitful space for specialists to provide us with tools and strategies for the best synergies in our productive systems. Very well, thank you.
Hola, buen día.
Good morning, everyone. I'm very pleased to be here. Thank you very much for getting up so early. Although we had some drinks after hours last night. Can we have a look at the presentation, please? When we talk about sustainability, the science that works on these aspects is mainly ecology. Also within agriculture in general. And agriculture has provided evidence between biodiversity and the way ecosystem works. We have collected a lot of evidence in the last 50 years around the globe. However, lately, agricultural systems have not prioritized the content with the management. We cannot say that it hasn't been included, but we have moved forward a lot in science, but that knowledge is not included in the ecosystem. Although it's not incompatible, they can in fact empower one another. Part of not prioritizing that knowledge, all those aspects that prioritize agriculture, we generate homogeneous systems that are not based on biodiversity. And a good part of what we work on is precisely how we can redesign those systems so as conservation and production can enhance one another and develop synergies. I'm going to give you a couple of examples with clear data, field data of agricultural companies. This is one of them. And here we have 500 sunflower fields in the main production areas of Argentina, of sunflower production in Argentina. And what we did was somehow evaluate how the context where that sunflower is produced could impact production. And that context, of course, my talk will be connected to link conservation and production, how landscapes were around those sunflower plots. And we could pass from more homogeneous landscapes with no diversity or nature toward landscapes that are more heterogeneous, with remnants of restoration patches. And there are different indicators that give us an idea of how diverse or homogeneous that landscape is. One of those indicators is border density. It's a simple indicator. It's 400 meter hectare, but we only count the border with something that is natural or semi-natural, bordering a road, grazed land, or a bush area. So if there's only a single border in contact with the natural habitat, we have 100 meters. And we count all those borders around in a circle of 2-kilometer radius around the production plot. And we have many indicators we take into account. These are natural experiments, we call them. And what we do is study all that variation in the field. There are some plots that are very homogeneous or heterogeneous landscapes, and we evaluate that impact on production. But that's not the only thing that we evaluate. We check the type of soil, precipitation, soil management, and we discount all those effects in the production of crops that has an impact on fertilization. And once we discount all that, we wonder in the landscape heterogeneity can explain beyond the things that we know that impacts yields. And it can explain a lot. This is the sunflower yield of a kilogram per hectare, and this is the indicator of density per border. To the right, you will see more contact with nature. And what you see is that from 20 meters per hectare to 100 meters per hectare, production increases by 24% in average. It's meaningful, but also it has a gigantic empowering effect. When you look at things that you don't necessarily look at and are important, effects end up being very huge. And this is a way of seeing a similar pattern through the size of the plot. In general, it's getting bigger and bigger, and it's related to the financial efficiency, scale economy, use of machinery, etc. But as we were saying before, it doesn't take into account ecology or ecological principles. And what we find here is that the bigger the plot, the lesser the production in average, the lesser the yield in average. Statistics, we discount all the production factors in statistics, but I'm showing here in very rough numbers so that you can see the production of the landscape, and it's a trend that is evident and important. These are effects that generate an impact. There are multiple reasons by which we can have these effects. One of these could be pollination, especially of sunflower pollination, which is so important. This idea where we design agricultural landscapes overlooking or not considering ecological principles, what we do is we design this type of landscape. Somehow it's the perfect recipe for pollen deficit in flowers. Most of the year we have these dead plot, so to speak, with no flowers and no habitat for pollinizations. And in a few weeks of the year, there are millions of flowers that have pollinizers. There's a low pollen offer, and there is a high demand in a short period. Besides, crops are not limited or are less limited by nutrients, water. We have very good density and genetic management, so pollinization deficits are even more important and express much more. And there are other reasons we will be able to see further on. This is production for nitrogen, water, and these are the functions that we consider for pollinization. We have the variable yield and floral visits, and we know that it varies depending on the variety and the area, but also depending on the diversity. So regardless of how much you put the melliferous bee or a particular species, you will be handling in this curve below. However, if you have a diverse community of pollinizers, it will be here at the top. This is a summary of many research works conducted for many years where we checked on different production items. And this is a repetitive pattern we found. Pollinization is very important in when you grow soybean. In average, it can rise by 21%. The yield can be plus 21%. And biodiversity is also important, not only to increase production in average, but for the stability of production. Precisely, one of the things ecology has proven is how biodiversity can generate more stable systems throughout time. And agroecosystems are somehow part of planet Earth that follow the same ecological principles. And what we see here from left to right, from top to bottom, how production throughout time becomes more unstable in landscapes that are less biodiverse in terms of pollinizers. This biodiversity or stability can be seen not only in the number of crops and species, but also how the interaction networks are within our agroecosystems. What we have here is once again sunflower plots with the traditional weed management, very clean with a naked soil, and many of the sunflower plots where we left some weeds, of course not during the critical period, but during floration. And here we have the interaction network of plots with no weeds. Here we see the plants and the pollinizers, and most of the plants are sunflower because it's a sunflower lot. And we see that we have only one type of bee, and they visit this sunflower. And here we have very few weed, and it's a pretty clean plot. Here we see more weeds, as you see here, but these weeds are connected to a lot of pollinizers that were not present here. So weeds have flowers, attract a lot of pollinizers, and these pollinizers visit sunflowers. And as you can see, you have more melliferous bees within those plots. As a consequence, we have a very weird scheme that states that the more weed species you have, the more sunflower yield. Of course, it doesn't mean a plot that is full of weeds. The idea is that there is an ecological knowledge that you can use to purchase less input and to increase gross margins and have a lower environmental impact and generate less resistance to herbicides. This idea is also applied to plants for plagues and their natural enemies, pests and natural enemies. The question of pets is something in an ecosystem that are not diverse, even in natural ecosystem. If you are in monospecific forests in America, you will see pests. They call them outbreaks that consume thousands and thousands of hectares naturally. The same happens in Patagonia. In some monospecific forests, such as Lenga forests, we have those outbreaks. But you will never find pests in diverse system. You will not see that in a rainforest. You will not see that a single insect at tenths of hectares. This happens in certain areas where you have herbivores and certain plants, and those systems are more stable. So, not considering these ecological principles have an important impact on the economy, not only at the level, at business level, but at national level. In fact, this is the amount of use of pesticides at global level per hectare. And if we compare the increased rates of pesticide use and the growth rate of yields, you will see that increase of pesticide use per hectare is much more. So we need to purchase much more to produce less. If our health depends on taking more and more pills, one to for my pressure, but to go to sleep. So if you depend on the taking of pills, something is not right with your health. So if our production depends on input and a lot of input, something is not sustainable. This is the number of weeds throughout time that generate resistance to glyphosate. And here the number of weeds that start generated resistance to the different active principles of certain herbicides. The pattern is pretty clear and quite alarming regarding the sustainability of our systems. Here, regarding weeds, we see 10,000 plots of corn and 10,000 plots of wheat. These are real data. This is real data. And once again, what we have is that gradient of biodiversity in these landscapes. And what we see here, and data for corn and soybean. And in both cases, the more heterogeneous the landscape, the less the proportion of herbicide-resistant weeds. There are 3 times less weed resistance than in homogeneous landscapes. In homogeneous or big plots, herbicide-resistant weeds appearance is faster and more abundant than in the other type of patterns. It's a clear, robust pattern.
And of course, following this idea of diversity, so far I showed some of the benefits or the synergies that we may attain between conservation and production, but maintaining diverse landscapes entails a lot of benefits that go beyond increasing productivity, and this permeates society because they improve the quality of water, air, health in general, and this is a growing demand in society. And basically, what we have observed based on global studies that were carried out is that in association with this loss of biodiversity, we can see not only in Argentina but in the world at large a loss of the contributions that nature makes to people, to humans, and most of them have to do with regulation contributions, the regulation of the planet system where we live, like the regulation of the water, of the air, the quality of the water, of the air, the climate, our climate. So there are 18 contributions that nature makes to humans, like, for example, in terms of air quality, and there are different indicators for each of these contributions. In orange, what you can see is that these contributions have been reduced over the past 50 years, and the light blue part is when they increase. So it's a very clear pattern. This loss of biodiversity is leading the planet to lose its capacity to sustain human life. Our planet will continue to exist, of course, but the conditions are becoming more and more difficult for the development of humans and their crops and our crops. So biodiversity and production can become mutual catalysts. So the big challenge is to design multifunctional landscapes integrating production, conservation, and human well-being. So I'm going to really rush through this part, but I just wanted to show you a number of examples where we have created landscapes where nature is brought back to the countryside, where we restore patches of natural habitat. And this process involving multifunctional landscapes is less intensive when it comes to the use of inputs, but it's more knowledge intensive. And the generation, well, for the generation of these multifunctional landscapes, this is what we know as sustainable production or productive transitions. We could be more efficient with precision agriculture so as to apply less herbicide, a smaller amount of herbicides. We could work with replacement, that is to say, instead of using a chemical synthesis insecticide, we could use a biologic insecticide, but the concept would be the same. It's killing the insect killing that bug. And I will provide a number of examples on the redesign of farms based on ecological principles. This is one such example. There are no more rectangular plots, but rather biological corridors where there are patches of natural and semi-natural habitats, and the heterogeneity of the terrain is honored. We use a lot of indicators over time to redesign each farm. One of the indicators is the edge density. This is one of the indicators that I showed before, and the other one is the surface of natural and semi-natural habitats. On the right, you can see that there is more green, more nature, and in the upper part there is more of an edge. So if everything is an edge, it's bad because everything is highly fragmented, and if everything is a natural habitat, it's also bad because there's no production. So the goal is for many natural systems to also be productive. So what we do is we use different models so as to find these optimal values. In many cases, what we've seen is that we can restore up to 20% of native habitat in the farms without losing money. Of course, it depends on its heterogeneity. Another study right here where we can see the natural habitat, edge density, and productivity. The yellow color is when there is higher crop productivity. This is a large number of crops all over the world, and 20% is native habitat, and the edge is 400 meters per hectare. We have found linear functions because we are still far away from those 400 meters per hectare. So we were saying that our goal is to go from 20 meters to 100 meters per hectare. So our landscapes are highly homogeneous, and they are far from the optimal situation between production and conservation. And these are spatially explicit models where we may design production, pollination. We are redesigning landscapes where we have 20% of the natural habitat, at least 10% of the edge. This is requested in several international agreements signed by Argentina. Yet another example, large rectangular plots on the left, two macro environments, micro environments, ecological corridors, the restoration of natural and semi-natural patches. We are also using precision farming, so the gross margin is positive, but there are several areas on the plot where the yield is lower. So there are micro zones in the plot where you lose money, and it is in these areas that we start to create those biological corridors. So these are different examples of strip seeding without changing the area of the crop, but by changing the configuration, the design of the space, the landscapes in that way become more versatile, they give more benefits. Of course, we do intense monitoring of the biological corridors that we implement. This is another example, and this is the end of my presentation. Well, this is the original field and the farm and what it looked like, where the plots did not respect the altitude, the topography, the soil, and this is what the landscape looks like after the redesign. This is another redesigned farm, so you can see that the red part is the contact between production and nature and how it increases. And when the production areas are far away from biological corridors, this is the distance from biological corridors using the combine. If it's more than 200 meters, the relationship changes. So, well, this is the end of my presentation because I have already exceeded the time allotted to my presentation. But these are the crop areas that have over 80% of the arable land, and that can be restored at least in 20% of their by 20%. So, well, this is a thank you photo for all the team that participated in these studies.
Gracias, Lucas.
Thank you, Lucas. We are going to give the floor to Diego right now. After Diego, we are going to ask you a question that was asked by one of the members of the audience.
Te paso este micrófono.
I am going to give you this mic.
Bueno, ahí está. Bueno, buen día a todos.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for the invite. It's a real pleasure to share this panel with Lucas. So my job is to talk about sustainable production systems. So I decided to address this in the way that I think I can talk about this. So we consider 3 pillars for sustainable development. Most of the times that we talk about this topic, we focus quite a bit on the production and environmental part, but I will talk about the social and economic components, which are also part of this concept, So we are going to be talking about that. So I will present this case study. It happens quite frequently. This is a conversation that I once had with a large farmer. Actually, it's an SME owner in the provinces. He said, withholdings are bad for the country, not for me. The problem for taxes, withholding taxes, is not my problem. I have millions of dollars in my estate. My family will always do well. The problem is that all the people that could work if my company produced more now do not work anymore. And the problem is that there are people that receive low salaries because there is no competition in the labor market. That is to say, competition in the labor market leads to people not earning better salaries. It's economy 101. So what does sustainable production mean? I think it is worthwhile to ask ourselves this question. So first thing, I wanted to know whether what this farmer was saying was true. And I said, okay, how many people work in the agro industry, in agribusiness? It's 4.1 million jobs. That is to say, these are direct jobs. It's not the spillover. It's not the production itself, but everything that leads for produce to be marketed, distributed, and so on. So production is 33%. The remaining 67% pertains to other aspects. It's 42 million hectares in production, 4.1 million jobs. So this means that every hectare is 100,000 jobs for each million hectares in production. Then I asked, is this farmer that I talked to, this case study, is he an SME owner or not? If we take a look at index click. Well, the agriculture sector is the economic sector with the largest amount of SMEs in the country. So this guy is not a large farmer. He's an SME owner in the province, in pretty much the same way as you have a store right here or a logistics service and so on. Well, this is what this farmer was, and many farmers are, an SME. And there is a significant difference, 99.7% on SMEs. If you compare this with the manufacturing industry, you can see the numbers right here. So it's a huge difference vis-a-vis other sectors. And this is another thing you can do. If you take a look at the assessments of dairy cows in the country, there are over 1 million cows, and well, the company that has the most cows has 0.98% of the total. Imagine how many trucks there are carrying cows around. So you can lose 1% of the amount of cows that exist in the country. And there are 43 million hectares in production currently in Argentina. The biggest 10 companies in production, the big seeding pools, have around 1.6 million hectares, which accounts for 3.7%. So there would be 96% of the land that is owned by the rest of the people that are not large farmers. So this was shared by Agustin, one of my consultants, and he said, well, what do we need if we need to increase the number of hectares in production? We have lots of companies that do so. Give me an example of agricultural companies that are SMEs in the interior, and let's see how they generate their profitability. Profitability is created through the creation of work. So this is a ratio between gross margin. Each product is a plot of a different company with the cost, that is direct production costs, and the production, that is to say, P by Q is the income. We can manage Q. There is not much we can do for P. We may have strategies, but not much more than that. So you just, well, it's clear enough. You need to produce more. It's not about spending less. It's about producing more. So cost efficiency is desirable, but high yields are a necessary condition for growth. That's an absolute truth. It's a must. Now, we may wonder, okay, socioeconomic sustainability. So how are we helping each other out? And this is something that everyone says in the agriculture sector. This is the only country in America that has negative support for agriculture. A negative support, and well, this is what this farmer said. If, for example, you start working in Vaca Muerta, extracting oil and gas, and you need to pay 30% worth of taxes, probably the entire real estate development that is happening in Vaca Muerta would be halted. So negative support is a disincentive for production, which implies fewer jobs and less growth. So this, when you are told these things, you say to yourself, okay, let's check things. It's not total. Okay. I usually, people persuade me when they tell me to reason about these things. So I always try to wonder whether it is really worthwhile to produce a little bit more. So there are 3 ways that are clear enough for farmers, which have to do with producing more. One of them is to produce more land, produce more in the existing land, and produce more in the future. So Lucas spoke about different tools that are desirable, especially for number 2 and number 3. I am not going to touch upon those topics because Lucas is the expert, but I will talk about the things where I can make a contribution. This is a study carried out by CRIA in 2013, and, well, respecting current legislation, what was the potential for entering into production if the price were the real price, right? And the possibility was to increase the area in 30 million hectares. So this would imply 3.5 million additional jobs. So this would be just about producing in places where people do not produce, do not farm. There's the farming places that are not farmed right now. This was designed by Ricky, and right now the situation has changed very little. So it was a lost opportunity, 3.5 million jobs that never became a reality. So that was a potential that was lost. So where could we produce? Where could we farm? This was created by Germani Mariano and Mariano Weiss from Korea, America. These are the marginal environments. So my information was based on producing in marginal environments. What are those? Well, people would say those that are on the edges, that are on the margins. But some people say that it's the places where production is limited by the factors of the context of the site or the climate vis-a-vis other factors. In the country, as we move away from the pampas towards the north, towards the west, this is a simulated yield map that indicates that productivity is reduced as you move away from the pampas. So that means that we cannot manage the amount that we produce. We have a limit. So if the price is suffering, this can affect production, and this is where jobs are lost. Now, all of the projections that existed indicated that we can generate a lot more jobs if you increase production in the green part, like, for example, in the province of Buenos Aires, Córdoba, Santa Fe, Salta, Santa Fe, La Pampa. These are places where production might be increased, and this is what we can see on the right-hand side. There are places where production, where farming is not possible. You need to make a decision there. If the price offered were higher, those places with the right decisions on crop management could enter into farming. So the alternative is to give power to the places that are more productive, as Lucas was saying. So what happens in a situation such as this one is that these places are about, it's like farming 10,000 kilometers more towards the north or towards the west, but it's right in the middle of the good plot, and we don't realize that. When we put together gross or net margins at the level of the production plot, you begin to realize that within those places you need to make very important decisions. First one is, do I farm or don't I? If I farm, is it with a greater quantity? And if I farm, how do I farm so as to make things profitable? Now, if the price is suffering or it bears taxes, it's really impossible to find a workaround for this. For a place that is biophysically limited when it comes to farming, we cannot make it farm enough in order to not to be bankrupt. So this takes us to the second part, producing more in existing land already. So there are ways in which we can produce the arable land, and one of them is through incentives.
It's almost the only way they can enter production when we are limited biophysically. How can we produce more when we already produce? The first is to improve in genetics. This is improvement in soybean yield. To the left, you have average yield. To the right, adjusted yield, taking the maximum yield every 5 years. That it's a proxy for genetic progress, although questionable. This is a big impact. Productivity does not increase. We do not produce more. Soybean might be the great case, but it's not the case in general. So we have the possibility of producing more. When you see the causes, there are many different causes, but I'm not interested in this picture other than saying there is no acknowledgement of IP. If there is no perceived profitability of our own, then this does not translate in a productive system. We used to have the possibility of recording this IP, but we can adapt the most adequate variants to each territory. We have 4.4 patents released. The other thing I wanted to speak about was genetic is providing a ceiling. If we cannot improve genetics, then we are doomed. Another way is the yield gap, reduction of yield gap. There is a potential determined by the biophysical limits. And the difference between these two is the yield gap. If you see yield, that is the orange bar, the C company, Empresa C, is the one with the best yield. If we consider its potential, the total bar, it's the worst production company. The best producing company is Company A, the first one, the one with the most yield within the limits of its own environments. How can we close this gap? There are several questions. But before we pass on to these examples of questions, I wanted to speak about this because we have discussed this a lot in the past. And I discussed this with Victor Sadras, and I told him, I'm working to stabilize yield on edge areas, marginal areas. It's a poor decision, he said. This is the graph he drafted. Let's imagine there's a potential yield for a certain company. This varies every year. Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less. If you have the same yield all the time, you are missing the potential increase of unfrequent years. So you will miss those lost opportunities, and those lost opportunities are lower yield and less job position. When instability is well understood, it means being able to capture the potential yield when we focus on every site every year. For that, we need to manage agronomy in the right scale to be able to capture that variability. It's an interesting concept, and I changed my mindset. I came back to Argentina and I told my thesis director, maybe we are missing the point. Well, to wrap up, we all know how we increase yields. The yield gap in terms of management is part of this project, is research with a database Lucas has already shown, but in a different way. What are the things that make yields grow? And it's a pretty obvious: fertilizer, genetic density, date of growing, of seeding. That is a factor that perhaps it's sometimes overlooked. But what I did later within the CREA movement was, why do you think that you cannot harness that productivity? And the red is cost. Let's go back to the beginning. If the relation input output is poor, it's impossible to overcome the situation, even if you know how to manage crops well. There's something that is well beyond what we can do as agronomists, and this is my thesis. Then we have the climatic variable, date of seeding, and what it says is that the climate uncertainty is related to irrigation. The only risk. The only way we can take risk to have higher yields is to have a better insurance. There's no other way of having a better forecast for the yield. And if we do not have a developed market for that, this is not going to happen. Well, to wrap up, this is what Lucas shown. I ran out of time, so I'm going to skip fast. But this is what Fernando Andrade shows. We have to change the curve. Within the current situation, this is what we have presented. But to change curve, what we can do is cluster them. This is a commodity business, so we do not compete for positioning. This is the same project we spoke about. This is my calculations. If we cluster them applying the CREA methodology, but it could be a way of sharing, compare, give advice, following a methodology, and generating more productivity. So sharing in the future could be a good idea and challenging one another. And the next one is to look forward, thinking we have already spent our petty cash. Fertility of the soils is depleted. So if we want to move forward, the only way out to move forward in the long term, producing more, now focusing on what we talked about, but taking care of the fertility of the soil. This is what we published. There are nutrition schemes and fertilizer schemes varied depending on the production of each plot, and that's the only way of upholding yields for long term. And we have more yields and higher profitability with the scheme. And sometimes it meant typical extensive rotation of phosphorus, nitrogen, and it meant a lot of money. We saw this in the long term. If you have this balanced fertilization and you tested growing soys using balanced and differential fertilizer, there was a snapshot on this, and it produced more. I wanted to round up of who's the sustainability of productive system is the companies, also sustainability. Now, there are things we have to focus on, and it's on the social, economic side. What generates jobs is production, no other thing, because that makes the relation of profitability of a company is good. Discouraging the productive growth of the sector is impossible to be sustainable in all different spheres. The technical tools are already there. We continue discussing these technical tools because we devote ourselves to this, but it's futile. We have to take it in a different way. The good news is, having said all that, in order to for the sustainable development of the agricultural system in Argentina, challenges and opportunities are the same. Thank you so much. I'm sorry for my timing.